Good evening, everybody. You're very welcome, and welcome back to Words on Whiskey. We're just going to try and get you back on Facebook. Hello. We hopefully have everybody now. So we've got Facebook, YouTube, and Periscope. So look, thank you all very much for joining us. We had a nice week off last week. It's been a busy few months, so a bit of a break was called for. So we hope you're keeping well, and thank you for joining us. If you do have questions, please do post them in the chat, and I'm sure Chris more likely Chris and I would be able to answer them. So again, you're all very welcome. And look, our guest this evening is a young man who really exemplifies what is great about the Irish whiskey community. He's enthusiastic, he's knowledgeable, he's very sharing of what he does know, he's hardworking, and he's extremely modest, which is modest to a fault. So look, there's very few people that I would put in Chris's category in terms of what he knows and what he's done for Irish whiskey, and in fact what he's done for drinks. So look, I'm delighted to bring him in, and let's just welcome Chris. Chris, good evening. How are you?
Not bad at all. All going well here. Yourself?
I'm good. Like, difficult times for you. I know normally you would be setting up the bar at least at this stage and working away.
Yeah, well, 6 months off last year, can't be exactly giving out about too much. But yeah, from August to now, it's been a little bit strange going from full outdoor service to full outdoor and in service to being closed doing takeaways, open back up for outdoor, and then what's coming in the next few weeks will be a little bit questionable. But yeah, it's different to say the least. It's keeping us on our toes.
Yeah. So for those people that don't know, Chris is down in Kilkenny, working in the Dillon. That's one of your roles. I mean, there's a lot of different things that you do, and one of them is working in the Dillon bar, which is one of the great whiskey bars down there in Kilkenny. What has it been like for you over the last 6 years, essentially?
Basically, yeah, at this stage. Well, the Dillon opened in 2009, 2010 when there was a big recession in Ireland. So we're used to kind of fighting through these mini breaks and little bits of differentness going on. But yeah, it's grand. Since August, as I was saying, I'm going from different styles of service, different styles of rules, different styles of obligations to make sure the bar is open, different types of service. It's a learning curve and a learning experience where we're leaning on the guidelines a lot and how they're explained. We lean on the opening procedures themselves. Realistically, we just want to get the drinks to the tables, make sure the customers are still happy, which is what we've been doing for years. And using the time off and the downtime to work on menus, work on recipes, and just put as much effort in as possible to make sure when we do get fully back open and everyone inside and out, that everyone gets the best experience they can get.
Yeah, I mean, you're an incredibly busy young man. You're always involved in something or other. So in one sense, maybe the lockdown has given you a little bit of extra time to work on recipes and projects and things like that.
Yeah. Some might say too much time.
Too much time at this stage, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Social media can be a great thing, but it can be exhausting at the same time. If you spend too much time at it, you get a lot done, which is great. In work itself, if you spend too much time at it, you get a lot done. But having the actual downtime of the bars being closed and everything is great. You get to relax and take a step back and actually see And the time and effort I was putting into certain things, you wonder if you spent less time at it, would you get more time out of it? So
Yeah.
just prioritizing.
Yeah. I mean, what revelations have you had, I suppose, over the last year then, in terms of, with that time off, what have you focused on? I see you're a lot more present on, obviously, tastings, social media, and so forth. But presumably you're doing other things also.
Yeah, with 2019, 2020, the volume of new brands, new distilleries, new releases, it's an extremely hard thing to keep up to date with, because as you can tell, nearly every single week that I've tuned into the show, one of the first things you do at the start is say we're up to 32 distilleries this week, and then next time round you're up to 34. And then sometimes you feel like it's at 34 already because they're just climbing so quickly. So yeah, hitting up a couple of the different societies, sitting down with tastings for them, you really do get to see different people or different groups and aspects on the same brands, which is great. Just catching up with all the different new releases and new brands, people changing roles, people changing jobs, using the downtime to literally catch up, because there was times in 2019 where I genuinely would say you'd be on the ball, you know everything that's going on, everyone in the industry like that.
Yeah. There's too many now. There's too many to know everything now. But I mean, you do keep in touch with everything, Chris. You really do have a great knowledge. How did all this start? Or I suppose, firstly, you're a Kilkenny man, born and bred, are you?
Yeah, here the entire way through. Actually working for the same company for 16 years now. So working in Biddy Early's cocktail bar for 16 years, and the same company opened the Dillon Whiskey Bar next door, and they've had that for 10 years now. So bartending between the two of them, which is great because the cocktail bar is extremely high paced, high volume, and then the whiskey bar is more relaxed environment, tourist orientated, and keeps everything kind of level. So when you're spending your 5 days a week hopping back and forth at the very, very start.
And that's so. This is the Dillon where you are at the moment, and you have been, as you said, for so long. Obviously, that was open at the time. But I mean, are you doing takeout service now, or outdoor service?
Outdoor service. So the picture you have there on the right hand side, that purple lining, it's an archway that is our cocktail terrace, which is an open area with a roof, kind of semi-closed or semi-enclosed, and we're doing outdoor service there since the start of June, and we'll continue to do outdoor service until obviously they change their mind, change their rules, and we'll open indoors. But yeah, it's been fast paced. This whole island of staycations where you have everyone from north, east, south, and west traveling around rather than leaving the island. It's been fantastic. 7 days a week, you're basically.
I mean, Kilkenny would be very dependent upon tourism, of course. Is that seen overall a massive downturn, or are you getting the Irish to come and visit Kilkenny?
A cross between two. So we would know the hotels at the moment are close to full with people doing staycations, which is fantastic. It completely and utterly compensates for it. But once everyone gets back to their normal everyday jobs, school, colleges, and everything like that, if the tourism industry side of it doesn't open up, you'll definitely see the difference in percentages. But at the moment, one is compensating for the other, which is fantastic to see.
I mean, Kilkenny is a real hub, if you like, for whiskey. I mean, there's the Kilkenny Whiskey Guild there, which, what is it, 11 bars and one off license that are dedicated to experiences in Irish whiskey and having a wide range.
Yeah, the lads are doing a fantastic job. The bars themselves excel at having tastings every month in person, obviously. At the moment, it's being held off a little bit until the in-person tastings can open up again. Last year, the lads did a few different virtual tastings as well, just to make sure there was something going on. But yeah, you get a couple different bars, a couple different personalities and styles of service, and unlike a society which would be one body, making sure everything's being done. This is multiple different places working together, from a tourism side and from a whiskey side, just bringing them both together.
Yeah. Well, this is the cathedral in Kilkenny. I mean, it is a real tourist hotspot, Kilkenny, in terms of it has the castle and has this cathedral, which played a very significant role in development of a product that you've released, and obviously the Kilkenny Whisky Guild, 11 bars and 1 off license. And so this was at the launch of that event, and that's going back. How long ago is that now, Chris? Is it 3 years, 4?
4, I think.
Almost 4 years. Yeah.
It kind of overlaps. There was a development stage with Jim, Eddie, Cyril, and the lads were getting together for close to a year before anything actually physically happened, to get it all kind of pieced in together. That picture of the launch was Mary's Cathedral, which is in the middle of Kilkenny. It's the Medieval Mile Museum. So basically, Kilkenny has not only a lot of medieval buildings, but majority of them are restored. You can go into them, you can see the original painting and the original furniture and everything like that. It's not like some of the tourism spots in Ireland where you can see broken down walls and the frame of the actual things. And you're kind of imagining to yourself what it would be like to be inside. But a lot of these medieval buildings, when you walk inside, you can see where people lived, how they slept, where they ate, the whole story put together. But the launch itself was fantastic.
No, that was a brilliant evening. I remember that well. That was yeah, that was an overnight stay for sure. That was needed down there. But yeah, it's hard to believe it 4 years ago now.
Yeah, we put together welcoming drinks and cocktails for the night, showcasing different brands. It was fantastic.
Yeah, yeah. Well, hopefully those days will come back again soon, Chris. Tell us about growing up. You grew up in Kilkenny? Were you in a drinks-related family? Were you influenced by family members, or how did you get to work in the hospitality sector?
That side of it, well, there was always a bottle of whiskey or a bottle of cognac in the presses, like there would be in most families, but mine was more along the lines of whiskey that went into Christmas cakes and cognac that went into puddings and stuff like that. More food orientated than drinks orientated. But once you grow up around these things, people are drinking them, people are eating with them. My grandparents and that kind of style are that kind of generation. Every family function you would turn up to was apple tarts, apple cakes, sandwiches. They always cook from scratch or bake from scratch. And I used to help my granny a lot. So when you're growing up, you're playing with recipes and you're being shown different weights and measurements and stuff. That's kind of where, when I went into the drinks industry, my interests were cocktails, the recipes, why these things taste the way they do, how you put them together. And I don't know about you, but if I was to make an apple crumble 100 times in a row, I still couldn't do it as good as my grandmother.
Yeah.
To figure out why. Yeah, that kind of thing. So when it came to cocktails, you go to a different bar, you go to a famous hotel or something, they would produce a drink that you've made yourself, but when they produced it, it tasted that bit nicer. And it's figuring out that was kind of the intrigue.
Was that something that you had as an interest in as like flavors? Was that something you had an interest in as a child growing up, or was it something that developed later on?
Developed through, as I said, my grandmother baking and different recipes they were cooking, because I would have started off like everyone else with meat and potatoes, and then eventually
meat and 2 veg.
Rice. Yeah, and you get pasta, rice, and everything else introduced to you, and just broaden your horizons, kind of thing. But yeah.
And your first job then, Chris, was it working in the bar?
No, supermarket. Stayed Super Value for a year.
Right.
Getting good training sweeping floors.
Yeah. Well, you have to start somewhere. But so, what was it that drew you then into the hospitality sector? Did you go drinks first and then cocktails, or cocktails first?
No, floor staff first. I show me age. Back when I started in the industry, you started on the floor, you spent X amount of months doing that, then you moved behind the bar to do glasses, spent X amount of months doing that. You get fast enough, they'll trust you with orders, running drinks and things like that. And if you're, after another couple of months, if you're quick enough, they'll teach you how to make cocktails. And as I was saying, the earliest where I started was extremely high paced, high volume. The lads had a very, very good standard. So
Yeah.
you always had to hit the nail on the head for every single one. So start from the
Yeah.
bottom and move your way up.
I mean, you are a young man, but you seem to have been in the industry for so long. And well, I'm sure you have been in the industry for, what is it, 20 years?
16.
16. Oh, you're only a young buck.
Just shy of half of me.
Yeah. So, I mean, you've had success in competitions as well on the cocktail side as well. What do competitions give you? And is it just something to push yourself, or, how do you rate Ireland and the country in terms of international cocktail standards?
Well, we're greatly influenced by those who've come before us. So a lot of the trends that we follow will stem from the States or stem from Europe.
Yeah.
A lot of the bartenders will get their ideas from travels, but especially in the last 10 years, a lot of the drinks will be adapted for our own circumstances.
Yeah.
If you go out to Scandinavia, for instance, you'll have Scandinavian flavors and drinks. You come back to Ireland, it'll inspire you to use Irish honey, Irish heather, Irish ingredients, or something that's a little bit more substantial to the country you're coming from. But when I started off competing, push towards competing as opposed to forced to compete. Our manager Jimmy is a former Irish champion, European champion at cocktails, so he always had a very high standard for his staff. And when the opportunity arose, he would send any of us off to competitions just to better our own skills, better ourselves. And when I started off in the industry, I was quite shy, quiet. Doesn't show now, but when you're competing, you're forced to talk on stage about your ideas, the flavor combinations and everything like that. And when you can talk to a room with 600 people and still be able to make the drink the exact way you want, not forget your ingredients and everything like that, it's a life lesson that you kind of carry with you.
Yeah. How much practice does it take, Chris, to, like, you come up with a recipe, and then of course there's a recipe is one element of it, then there's the presentation, and a lot of these competitions is quite around show as well. I don't know if that's your style in terms of flashy presentation of the drinks.
Yeah, there's two kind of sides to it. The first kind of competitions that I used to do was cocktail competitions where you're making physical drinks. So you're working with a sponsored brand or multiple sponsored brands where you are using their liquid to either tell a story, their liquid for flavor patterns, or you're always trying to extract something, whether you're showcasing a brand, you're showcasing the flavors that's in the product itself, or you're trying to get other things to complement it. Then the second side of competitions is if you decided to do flair. If you've ever seen the film Cocktail with Tom Cruise, where you're throwing around bottles and tins and still making drinks. So that's kind of the showmanship, showing yourself off as opposed to showing the drink off. And then the cocktail side of it, no matter how much you speak or how much you tell a story, it's at the end of the day, it's about the drink. 9 times out of 10, it's all points towards the drink. Your own demeanor might count, but usually comes down to drink. Yeah.
Well, obviously, you have a huge knowledge now built up of flavor. What goes into, so, I mean, you've developed your own cocktails, and I know at the launch of the Kilkenny Whiskey Guild, you developed a cocktail for that. What goes into, what's the thought process and the process behind actually coming up with a new cocktail?
In the beginning, you're coming up with recipes and fighting with Google to make sure that they don't already exist, because no matter how much you find, play with, the odds are somebody has already done it before. Like it's very hard for you to pick up a menu at the moment read a list of drinks and not, let's read a list of original drinks and not look at it and go, that's an adaptation on an old fashioned, that's a twist on a sour, because there's been so many drinks, there's literally been a couple hundred years worth of drinks coming before you. So
Yeah.
when you're entering competitions, if you take, for instance, let's just say Cologne rum, for instance. I just happen to have a few things here in case people ask questions. But Cologne rum, for instance, so this is very floral, very funky. If you wanted to create an original cocktail with this, you would first look at cocktails with Jamaican rums, which are very floral and funky. Anything that's very ester driven, really, really big flavors. And we're in Ireland, so you try and use something Irish. So if you were playing with this and birch syrup from trees, honey syrup, if you're playing with fresh citrus, you can use something that's grown in Ireland. So instead of using lemon juice or lime juice, you could use raw unpasteurized apple juice, which would be very tart. You try and play with the flavors that are around you. So it's very easy to just make this lime juice and sugar a natural daiquiri. You figure out the flavors that are in this that you like, then you will swap and change your sugar for syrup or your sugar for liqueur, because you just swap sweet for sweet. You play around with your citrus and you swap around something sharp for something sharp, something bitter for something bitter. And then if you really like the product, you might increase the amount of alcohol that's in it. Go from like 40 mils to 60 mils because you want to showcase the spirit. Or if there's something subtle in it, you might have to bring down the level of spirit, bring something else in like a fortified wine or a liqueur to heighten it. So trial and error is a lot of it, figuring out the flavors that you like in it, and then either something that accentuates that flavor or something that heightens that flavor. So if you're making soup and you have a load of vegetables, sometimes the answer is just salt and pepper to make everything pop. And sometimes it's herbs or spices. You kind of figure out over time common flavors, something that really works well with it. Like you put coffee with chocolate, you put cream with orange, different things like that. Once you've done it a couple hundred times, you start to realize what flavors will definitely always go together.
Yeah.
Which is pear blend. So.
Tell me, what's been the biggest surprise combination of flavors that worked really well that you may not have expected? Something that stands out.
Something that stands out. There is a Barbados Liqueur called Falernum. It's used in a lot of tiki drinks and a lot of Caribbean drinks. It's usually ginger, lime, vanilla, clove, which are all big flavors. And I was working with Dottie O'Connell from WD O'Connell's, just kind of developing drinks for a little bit of a menu. His bill fill is a light peated single malt. Light and peat compared to Islay whiskies and stuff like that. It's got a lovely citrus smoke kind of note to it. And if you've ever added ice or water to a peated whiskey, it usually drives the smoke extremely big or really big on the palate. So playing around with drinks with that, figuring out that Falernum, even though it's a big ginger, big clove, big lime notes to it, Irish bitters, fresh lime, and Bill Phil, his peated whiskey. Combining the four of them together, it did something that was very unusual. It comes across like orchard fruits, and it comes across like tea, as opposed to the flavors that are actually physically in the glass.
Right.
It's a flavor combination that works really well with rums. It works really well with whiskey. But peated whiskey, I've tried it a few times before with Islay, and you can only ever get the peat, or you can only ever get the liqueur. You can never get both, and you can never get them to work in harmony. Well, working with them together, you ended up getting 7 or 8 different notes, 8 different flavors. That really worked. The complete opposite side to it is making a Bloody Mary, but using milk to clarify it. So
Wow.
add all the ingredients, then add milk to a glass, add all the ingredients for Bloody Mary, and it clarifies it and turns it to clear. So it's almost like a saffron yellow tint or kind of red hue going through a normal glass of water, but the milk still helps keep your mouth coating texture, still helps keep the kind of tomato mild sweetness to it, loads of spices in behind it, which really kind of pumps it up. We were using Belvedere vodka, which is a rye base, and yeah, you could still get that crisp dryness. You could still have that creamy kind of black pepper. So flavor combinations that I never thought would work. It was just experimenting and messing around, but really did surprise us all.
Yeah. So obviously you're exposing yourself to a whole variety of different spirits and then different combinations of all these spirits. I mean, you do quite a bit of consultancy and cocktail development, and then you work a lot with is it off the cuff bitters you do work with?
Yeah, Jared from Off the Cuff is myself and himself are the co-creators for Aqua Vitae. He's been making bitters for 5 years, been in the industry for a little over 20, from chefing side originally and then into the bars, just swapping flavor components for flavor components, high volume for high volume. But his 5 years working with bitters, essentially what he's doing is he takes new mixed spirit, takes a single ingredient like say coriander seeds or licorice root or anything like that, and he will macerate the botanical in the liquid until he finds a biting point where you get all the sweetness or bitterness or sharpness or spice from that specific ingredient. Then you do that with 100 different ingredients, and then you start blending them together in different stages to figure out what combinations actually work. In saying that, if you were to use a bark, for instance, like a cinnamon bark, that could take a couple of hours, that could take a couple of days or a couple of weeks. So if that took 2 weeks to get to that biting point, your next ingredient only takes 4 days. The ingredient after that takes 30 days. If you're eventually going to make a bitters where you're putting these ingredients together in stages, you then have to figure out if something goes in after a week and then you add your second ingredient, which is something completely different. Does it cancel any of the sweetness out or spice or bitterness? Does it add to it? Does it make it more complex? So bitters can be a very fun but very different way of going about things. So that's his automatic.
Are you saying there's over 100 ingredients in some of these?
Some of these would only have like 14, 15, 16 ingredients, but at any given time, we'd have a library of flavors sitting on the back wall for experimenting, for redesigning different flavor profiles. Those 4 main flavors. So orange marmalade, it's working off the principle of marmalade. Rather than having an orange bitters, a lemon bitters, or grapefruit bitters, he's taken all the different sides of citrus that he likes, from lemongrass, lemon verbena to fresh grapefruits, lemons, limes, oranges, Seville oranges for a little bit different of sweet versus sharp, and fennel and a few other ingredients. And then, to be transparent, sticks a full list of everything and anything on the back. So that when you're making yourself a drink and you're making something with lemon juice, you want to pair it, or you're making something with a gin with a certain botanical and you want to pair it, the transparency on the back is basically helping you make the drink exactly how you want. So that comes from, as I say, the flavor library of flavors that's sitting on the wall and behind. You have to be completely honest about what you're using, how you're using it, how long you're using it for, especially if you're going to the States and you're filling in TTB forms. You have to tell them exact breakdowns of what you're doing. You can't hide your recipes, even though technically they're secret. A lot of bitters that are out there will be completely secret. You'll just know that it's an orange bitters, so you know there's orange in it, or a component that makes it taste orange. But once you do that and literally tell everyone what it is, it makes TTBs a lot easier, because you literally are telling what and where.
So you're going to the States with these hopefully in the next few months, is it?
Yeah, fingers crossed everything goes well. Jared's in the middle of the application forms and the different stages. You have to send off samples. So you, as I said, you tell them exactly what's in it. You send off samples for analysis, and they figure out, if you're telling the truth, exactly what's in them, the proportions that are in them. because we work with raw botanicals, raw spices, barks, roots, flowers. There are certain things around the world that if we were using tonka beans, for instance, tonka beans are not accepted in the States. There are different botanicals that are not accepted in Europe. Even if you're only using the world's smallest amount, and 20 pounds of it is intoxicating or dangerous, whereas you're only using a quarter of a gram or something. The second you say a certain name of a certain thing, there are countries that will just cross it off the list. But thankfully, all the recipes he has contain ingredients that are allowed in Europe and the States.
So, is it true that some of these bitters, if you take too much of them, are poisonous? I mean, rhubarb ones I've heard.
No, there's so years and years and years ago, say like prohibition with Irish whiskey. Sometimes there was Irish whiskey out there that was Scotch cut with turpentine, or different things were smuggled in under the guise of it was Irish whiskey. The same happened with Angostura bitters. So Angostura is the world's most famous brand label name. They've been making it since the 1800s. But there are products all around the world, and still actually guilty to this day, where they're not using Angostura's formula, they're using Angostura bark. So they call it Angostura, even though it's trademarked. And there were certain times where fake Angostura was being used, and it was being made out of whatever they could get their hands on. It could be cut with turpentine or anything like that.
All right,
and
okay.
They were being taken in measures in the morning to ail you, and people were taking it, and it was something they were not supposed to be ingesting, so it was causing sickness. So that's what you're saying is a fact. It's a fact that everyone's known for a couple hundred years that it can be poisonous, it can make you sick, but not the actual products themselves, just the
component.
Yeah, whatever it is they used, whatever they cut it with, and whatever they fabricated it from.
Yeah. How do you see the cocktail scene developing, and what is it about Irish whiskey in particular that lends itself well or not well? I don't know. I mean, I think well, but to cocktails.
No, definitely well. Category wise, we start off with pot stills, malts, blends, grains. Start off with the four of them. Then you look at malts. You have many different styles of casks that we can use. You can peat it, unpeat it. Soon with pot still, you'll have many different types of mash bills.
Yeah,
it's about 6 or 7 floating around at the moment, but once they get that over and done with, there'll be about 15, 20, a couple dozen that'll be played with. There'll be different versatile blends. Well, you see from the likes of Dark Silky at the moment, Dumpil's 1808, 2 Stacks, definitely. There's blends out there that are no longer just grain and malt, or just grain and pot still, which are great blends, but now they're diversifying it, where you have 2 Stacks. It's just grain and just malt, but it's multiple types of grain and multiple types of malt. Yeah. So if you have a bourbon recipe, grain, single grain Irish whiskey can work very well in bourbon recipes. Single pot still can work very well in bourbon recipes. Rye recipes, single pot still definitely carries across that spice element.
The spice,
Across things like Powers with a small amount of grain whiskey in it can work unbelievably well against big heavy flavors like herbal liqueurs and fortified wines. There are dozens of types of bourbons out there, but you kind of have the same flavor profile. You're hitting 6 or 7 notes across them all. Whereas when you look at pot still and malt and blends, they hit enough different types of flavor categories that when you're looking at them, you can't put 3 of them side by side with another 3.
Yeah. Is there a particular DNA? Is there a particular DNA within Irish whiskey that lends itself well to cocktails, or is it just that, you know, as they say, the breadth and diversity of what we have, there's a whiskey for every cocktail?
It can come down to the fact that you can play with any wood type that you want, so there's versatility there. The different categories, there's the diversity there, which will really help, but nobody wants to say anymore that Irish whiskey is just smooth. that's
Yeah.
just light, because there's enough categories out there and different brands out there at the moment that are fighting against that, and rightly so. But the vast majority of Irish whiskey that's being made at the moment, it can be described as inoffensive. At the same time, it's bold. So you have lighter than Islay Scotch, lighter than some big, heavy alcoholic bourbons, but enough complexity, enough spice, enough sweetness, enough cask influence that the flavors do carry across. Nearly everything being released these days is above 40, at 43, 46 a cask.
Yeah.
And the higher the ABV, the easier it stands up against a mixed drink. The easier it stands up against dilution soda water, stirring down with ice, and the more alcohol and more flavor impact. Perfect.
Yeah. What is it, Chris, that fascinates you about the spirits business? And I guess in particular, I mean, whiskey is, well, you're known for all spirits, but in particular, I guess whiskey as well. What is it that gained your attention, and why you've taken it to, if you don't mind me saying so, to an obsessive level of knowledge about all aspects of these spirits?
Well, starting off in the industry, everything was rum. I had a massive fascination with tiki drinks, kind of tiki culture, and how they would get 4 or 5 or 6, even 6 different types of rum, put them in a glass. All the flavors wouldn't fight against one another. They would create a profile that didn't exist beforehand, use all different types of exotic juices and sweeteners, and still produce drinks that are ordered 2, 3, 400 years later. When it comes to different styles of punches, a lot of what we would credit as tiki now came from the 1930s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. The likes of your zombie, your mai tais, just 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different types of rum in a glass, and all these flavors working together really got me curious, because you can mix and match yourself hundreds of different types of rums out there. And we were saying with Irish whiskey, it's 4 different categories, and inside those 4 categories, you can talk about 6 or 7 more different kind of layers. Whereas in rum, nearly every single island is a different category in itself. And some islands only have 1 distillery, some islands have dozens of different distilleries. And even though you have a Jamaican style of rum, you could have 12 different styles within that style. Move on to your next place like Ghana, where it's only 1 distillery, is an amalgamation of a couple different ones. They make many different styles, and it really, really makes it interesting, because you can't spend your life drinking rum and make it the whole way through the list. At the moment, you could probably spend your life drinking Irish whiskey and make it the whole way through the list if you can afford and find everything. But when it comes to Ireland, other than the fact that all the different categories are fantastic and there's some amazing liquid on the island, it also comes down to the heritage. You're from Ireland, you want to embrace everything that's around you. You can physically visit these places. You can physically meet these people. You can talk to them online and meet them at tastings and everything like that, which makes it a little bit more personal. Whereas if you were to spend your life talking about vodkas and rums and tequilas and everything like that, it could take a lifetime to see these places and to experience everything that there's to experience. So that kind of homegrown grassroots kind of nature to it definitely impacts.
Yeah, I mean, you love the history element of it. I gather, just you must love it to know that much. I mean, you've spent a lot of time doing research in developing your own release there, which we'll come on to in a minute. But is history important from the storytelling point of view, or just out of curiosity?
I never liked history when I was in school.
Did you not?
I never understood. I like the fact that the stories existed. I like the fact that you could literally look back in time 600 years and knew what someone was doing. I thought that aspect of it was cool. But sitting in history classes never entertained me. I never felt the, if you want to call it, a connection where you're listening to a story and you feel like you're a part of that story. It's not until someone tells you that during that war, that there was a war, cool, someone related to you was in the war or helping out or something, then it becomes a little bit more personal. But when it came to the bar side of things, the history and behind a lot of the spirits wouldn't make you understand why they taste the way they taste or why they're different.
Yeah.
When it comes to the history of Irish whiskey, Butchings, Aqua Vitae, and things like that, we will eventually again see regionality. So kind of like Scotland, we talk about Highlands, Lowlands, Campbelltown, Islay. You'll see in Ireland, there'll be like a peat belt, there'll be single malt hubs. There used to be Dublin for pot still used to be the north for a lot of the malt, the west for a lot of the peated influences, and that came down to industry, it came down to local growth. So if your area was good for growing malt, barley, grand. If your area was good for growing wheat and oats, you're going to use whatever's closest to you. If you're near a port, you can get coal. If you're nowhere near a port, you're using turf. So it was that history aspect of it that it makes sense. You're going to talk about a whiskey, you're going to taste the whiskey, and it's peated. Well, why did they make peat in Donegal? Why not? Why didn't they just use coal stills like everyone else? Why didn't they just use direct flame? And why didn't they dry them out like oven kiln dried and stuff like that? So that's the history side of it. That kind of it sticks to the story, helps you remember it, and it's not just about the story. It really helps you understand the what's, where's, and why's.
Yeah. If you were to pick a time that you could live in from a interest point of history for drinks, what would you say was the most exciting period of time for you at a drinks level?
Sorry, I half missed that. You were saying...
So if you were to pick an era to live in that would be relevant and most exciting at a drinks level, other than today, where would you picture that?
It has to be kind of the very early 1900s, probably in around 1930s, because you'd have the growth of tiki culture itself. You'd have the end of prohibition. So there's a lot of distilleries closing down that you can still visit. There's a lot of distilleries surviving nationally and internationally that you'd still be able to see the growth of, and that kind of community. The 1930s and 40s is when 5 distilleries could be closing down and they'd all unite into one distillery, the likes of DWD, Tyrconnell, or the Watts family up in Donegal was a formulation of a couple of different distilleries from Belfast and from the north kind of getting together. Same down in Cork, you have a couple of different distilleries coming together because it's just it's not survival of the fittest, it should be, but it was that embrace of Irish community. I'm going down, you're going down. If we join forces, then maybe something will happen.
Yeah.
And I think it was just after Prohibition is pretty much one of the reasons why we see in the 1960s and 70s IDL, or Irish distillers, forming. You have to embrace who's around you or everyone goes down with the ship. And we see that throughout our entire history. So it'll be 1930s, give or take. It'd be great to go back to the 1800s and actually taste what poaching and whiskey was really like with flame fire and massive mash bills and things like that. It'd be great, but the living conditions might not be as good. So I'll stick to the 1900s.
Listen, I see there you have your Aqua Vitae, and how do I describe the Aqua? Well, you tell us. I mean, I have a bottle of it here behind my shoulder, and I have to say it's one of the most well-conceived and well-presented spirit products that I've come across. And it's obviously it's not a whiskey, but I know that you put an awful lot of research and the history side of it for me was fascinating as well. Could you tell us about that project, from the historical fact gathering right through to the development and where it stands now, and why you did it?
Too curious. Just me being too curious. So the project was just shy of 3.5 years. So originally reading Fionn O'Connor's book A Glass Apart, which is fantastic, and if anyone hasn't read it yet, definitely reach out and do. When you're reading the words Aqua Vitae, a precursor to whiskey, which I've been working with for quite some time now, 5 years at that stage. Once you're reading that actually original recipe comes from, as far back as we can find so far, stems from Kilkenny, from the area of Ossory, which is basically Leinster outside of Dublin. So the area of Ossory, the Confederate capital at that stage was Kilkenny. The hub was Canice's Cathedral, which you showed earlier on. And the bishop that was sent from Italy to train in Avignon in France to Ireland based himself in Kilkenny, because at that moment in time, we didn't really have kings and queens. We had families that would control certain dioceses or certain areas, and the Confederate capital, as I was saying, was Kilkenny at the time. So the main decisions were being held in Kilkenny, but the, if you want to call it parliament and jails and stuff like that, for the heads of state would have been in Dublin, as they are now. Because Dublin is and was the main port at the time. So nearly everything came and went through Dublin, Waterford, Cork, Donegal, or Belfast, usually in that order. Because nearly every access point you had from
sea access point,
from the south, France, Spain, not America at that stage, but anything was coming from usually those sides. It would only be Scotland and Northern England going in through Belfast, generally speaking. Even Liverpool and Manchester at that time came through Dublin, usually through both. But we're finding out that the recipe stems from Kilkenny, which brings a bit of locality to it. That not only, of course,
the Red Book of the Red Book of Ossory, obviously, significant part in that.
Oh, massive part in that. So that's the first written document that's been found to date. I'll keep saying the words found to date because anything I've ever looked up or anything that's ever been looked up, you'd be told that something happened in the 1900s. Cool. Then somebody goes back in time, or go back in time with the research, they find something that predates that, something that predates that. If anyone ever finds something that predates this, definitely shake their hand, find out the information of it, and hopefully we can remake the liquid that would be. And if this is the first written record at the moment, and a recreation of it using kind of modern techniques, but it was it's a taste of a moment in time. So that was really what we're looking for, is whiskey. We know how it tastes modernly. I've gone back as far as the 80s, 70s, 60s, 50s, 40s, tasting different types of Irish whiskey and seeing how they developed. The lovely Dave Mulligan in Bar 1661's Bon Poitín, the lads in Mickle and Galway, they've recreated recipes of different styles of poitín. Go back 20, 30 years, you may not ever get a chance to taste an actual poitín or a modern interpretation of one. And at the moment, we can taste all different types of Irish whiskey, but at that moment in time, Aqua Vitae didn't exist on paper. And then all of a sudden there was a recipe for it. Or so there was a mention of it, then we discovered there was a recipe for it. Yeah. So the whole project was, what was it like? What did it taste like? How close can we get to the original without standing beside the person who's stirring the pot? Figuring out if the botanicals that are used, the barks, roots, herbs, spices, and flowers, do they come in dried form, powdered form, whole form? It's an easy thing to know now because you can fly something from the Middle East over here in less than a day. Back then, everything was boats and horse and carts, and a trip could take you 6 months as opposed to 6 to 16 hours.
Yeah.
So how do these botanicals, bark, fruits, flowers, and everything survive the journeys? What way would they come in? We have to look at different books over the centuries, different referencing points over the centuries, talk to different people to find out if saffron exists. Cool. How far back does saffron exist? Did they just use it in clothes? A lot of expensive tailoring done for kings and queens, saffron would be there to dye the clothes and stain the clothes. You go back as far as Cleopatra, you have saffron in the bath to help rejuvenate. Like these different Bach roots and botanicals are used for many different things. So we had to not only find the recipe, get the recipe translated, but also figure out if the recipe says 1, 2, or 3 different things, where did they come from? Are we talking about something coming from the West Indies? Are we talking something coming from the Middle East? Are we talking something coming from Italy? Thankfully, the Red Book of Austria itself, it references a lot of things you'd find in the Magna Carta.
But I mean, there would have been a lot of gaps. Would have been a lot of gaps in what the Red Book of Austria contained in terms of composition, or even origin of those components. So how did you go about piecing those together?
Well, Google's a very good start. Talking to different experts in the field, talking to different. I can never think of this word. Different botanists, talking to or looking up botanist books, which will give Italian explanations. It'll give Italian references. It'll give English references, French references. It'll give history on different botanicals or spices going to different parts of Europe, going to different parts of the world. Then Google is a great thing for seeing if something is used in cuisine as opposed to medical. Then looking up, and I'm seeing that for instance, one of the ingredients is called spikenard. So nard in Latin is nardi, N-A-R-D-I. And nardi basically means of ground, roots, grows from. So you can imagine every flower, tree, bark, root, everything comes from ground. So nardi is pretty much described for everything. It's like us saying tree. So oak tree, beech tree. It's like having that word tree. It could be anything. So spikenard that we're using is related to the valerian family. So in some cultures, it was used as a nerve tonic. In some cultures, it was used as a stimulant to either wake up the senses or numb the senses, depending on what way it was used or what combination of ingredients it was used with. A lot of what we lent on was cuisine. So in Italy, are they using, a lot of these recipes come from there, are they using in Roman culture and Italian culture? Is this something that's used in food? Is it used in medicine? Is it used in curative or for its curative properties? If so, cool. Follow that recipe and see how long it takes to get the whole way across Europe. Next item, it's medicine. Cool. Follow that and see how long it gets. That's why the thing took 3.5 years to figure out. Like, we pretty much had a recipe from day dot in text, but what you use, how you use it, why you use it, when it exists, what did it come across with. Figuring that part out, if you're using powdered cinnamon or if you're using cinnamon sticks, you'll get 2 completely flavor profiles. Cinnamon sticks themselves, cannella bark, there's different versions and variations of cinnamon bark. That's just one thing in itself. So you could have powdered, dried, crushed, and then the different variations of it there is. So once you take that one ingredient and you have 20 different variables, you can end up with hundreds of different flavor profiles. So
and then you have hundreds of ingredients, or
originally Aqua Vitae was made out of redistilled wine. So the wine would have had a lot of grape pomace. So the grape skin itself would have a massive impact on it. The way in which they made wine back then differs from how they make it now. Even if it's an organic wine, it'll still differ. It was only kind of leaning towards the 1350s when the Black Death comes in. Apparently, rats coming off ships through Hoth is what caused the Black Death to spread down towards Kilkenny, is what they're guessing anyway. Father John Klein writes about it in 1348, and it's in and around the 1350s that when you're using Aqua Vitae as a medicinal thing to be taken internally or externally against things like the plague, this kind of thing, when you're running low on your wine supplies, you can't get liquid and ingredients that you want from mainland Europe or from Middle East, because that's going to take months and months, you have to rely on crops. So oats, wheat, rye, whatever's grown in and around the local area, and Kilkenny has a massive history with barley. So that's the reason why when we tried many different distillate types, many different combinations, but we ended up using a pot still distillate from the Liberties, from the distillery that's founded in 2012. I'll just leave it at that. And it was for two reasons. One, because in the 1350s they were using local grain, which was most likely barley. And second of all, because it's a 50-50 mash bill between unmalted and malted. The malted barley carries enough sweetness in it that we don't actually use sugar, because they didn't use sugar back then, but we didn't actually use sugar in the recipe for the modern palate. We're relying on the malted barley content in the distillate for the sweetness. The second thing we're relying on is raisins. All the ingredients we use in this is 100% organic, just to make sure that you're getting all the natural flavors, sweeteners, compounds, everything that's in there. The raisins are used as they were according to the recipe for sweetness. We're using saffron, which is the main base in color.
Yeah, I mean, the saffron really comes through in that. Yeah.
So,
and of course, saffron was saffron back in the day as valuable as it is today?
Yep. Saffron has always been the most expensive spice in the world by weight. It takes, I think 99% of the growth of saffron in the world is 3 stems. It's very rare for it to be 4 stems. So the 3 stems inside the flower, the crocuses, that is your saffron threads. So you're pulling out 3 from every flower. When you pay like a tenner for 2 grams, 3 grams of saffron threads, it's very, very small amount. You can see how many flowers are actually in that little teeny tiny vial of crocuses. And yeah, saffron, and there's different grades of it.
Sure.
There's different grades you can get, which is to do with the quality of the flowers. And
most of it comes from one place, doesn't it? I mean, the majority of, I know there's different grades of saffron, but I think the high quality saffron comes from one particular. Is it near the Dead Sea or something like that? Where is it?
Not too far away. Majority of the saffron will come from the Middle East, Middle East, Malaysia kind of area. It's to do with the climate. It's to do with the humidity. Lost that word for a sec. Moisture content of the soil and everything like that. Ireland would be a terrible place. We have too much limestone. We have not enough sun. We're great for growing oak trees. We're not great for something like that. But that would have been one of the many imported ingredients. And I'll just lift up the camera. So
yeah,
the Aqua Vitae that we have is unaged. It's distillate plus maceration, and the maceration takes up to 36 days.
So just explain to us what that is, Chris, maceration, in terms of creating this.
So what you're doing is you take your pot still distillate in this case, and we stick it into stainless steel container so that it's non-reactive. And we put our botanicals in stages. So you have, for instance, saffron, raisins, clove, cinnamon, ginger, pimento berries, which is allspice berries, spikenard. There's many different ingredients that go in many different stages, and each one of these ingredients will have, like cloves, for instance, cinnamon, for instance, allspice berries, for instance, they have big, heavy oil contents. Something like saffron is very delicate. It's used against the raisins for a honeyed taste. It's used against clove for a marmalade, Seville orange, kind of orange bitterness. It's used against, our saffron and raisins are used against the spikenard for a cross between a menthol flavor and kind of lavender for all the world. But there's no licorice in this, but there's 3 spices that go together that create that licorice flavor, that kind of fennel flavor. the thing is extremely complex. It was really, really fun to put together. As I said, Jared spent 5 years finding the biting points for different liquids. And I did the same myself. I think it was 93 tinctures, which is individual flavor components, sitting macerating or sitting in alcohol for X amount of time each, sitting on a wall.
Wow.
Once you do that, it's, as I said, you're finding a biting point and it's on its own. But if you were to put three ingredients that take 7 days, you put the three of them in at the same time, they will counteract one another, they will complement one another. Sometimes you'll have two flavors trying to fight against one another, and other times you'll have like honey and saffron and raisins creating that honeyed sweetness, where the two of them complement one another, they play off one another, and you get extra flavors in there, much like when you're working with oak, extra flavors in there that weren't originally intended or weren't originally on the aspects themselves. It makes it really interesting. So the distillate is 66.1. It's brought down to 62% before we do the maceration. And then by the time we're finished, which takes up to 36 days, by the time we're finished, it drops down to roughly 55% ABV. That is the alcohol going into all the different barks, roots, and spices, coming back out. So very similar to whiskey going into wood. These go inside all the different barks, roots, and spices. They pull out the natural sweetness, they pull out the natural oils, they pull out the natural bitterness. And by the time we're finished with the Aqua Vitae and all the spent botanicals are left behind, if you were to eat the raisins, they would be quite bitter. There would be no sweetness left in them whatsoever, majority of the time. And you were to, I wouldn't recommend chewing on cinnamon bark as is, but if you were to chew on the cinnamon bark, it actually is a lot sweeter than originally would be.
Oh yeah, I wouldn't chew on cinnamon normally.
I've done it regrettably at some stages, but I'll end up doing that simply. It's one of the many things you're smelling in your taste, and much like taking distillates off of a pot still, you're tasting this at different stages, and you have to see with a biting point, have you extracted all the sweetness? Now your liquid might taste absolutely fantastic, smell absolutely fantastic, but was there something left in that botanical to say pulling out, say drawing out? And one of the easiest and quickest ways of doing that is actually tasting that raw material itself. Now, you'll have to get too close to you for some of it, but it works.
How close do you think you got to the historical version that was in the Red Book Ossuary? I mean, it's
between
so much work.
86 and 93% at the moment. We're still, so that's why we're doing everything in batches at the moment. So we're laying down batch 5 soon. So batch 1 was unbelievably close to the original one. It was as close as we could do in a modern interpretation. With our modern equipment, with a source distillate, it was as close as we could physically get at that moment in time. The recipe itself was extremely heavy on clove oil and clove flavoring, to the point where it was masking some of the other flavors. I know what's in there, so when I taste it, I'm searching for it, I can pick it out. But for a modern palate, it was hiding a lot of the subtle nuances, and not a lot of people these days will eat a baked ham with 100 cloves in it anymore. Clove is a very intense, very high-powered flavor. And as I keep saying to people these days, your food is full of salt, your food is full of sugar, your diet is full of preservatives and all these different additives. Back in the 1300s to the early 1900s, before like World War I and II and stuff like that, things being filled full of salt, all these additives that we have these days, and sugar may or may not have existed. So the palates completely and utterly change when we start getting in the likes of microwave foods and canned foods that last years and years and years. They always have something in it that didn't exist before. So when we try something like this that's extremely dominant in a clove flavor, you're going to have to really like clove to really appreciate and find something else. It's like a whiskey that's heavily peated. If you know what you're searching for, you might be able to tell me what the malt tastes like. But on the first glimpse or first taste, it's a peat wall, and it's very hard to get past. So when we did the second batch, we pulled back the clove maceration by 12%. And we blind tasted the first one on a launch day for Talk Dram with Omar Fitzel.
Yeah.
We sent it out to X amount of bloggers, X amount of bartenders, and on a Twitter conversation, they got the bottle, small little 50ml bottle with a wax seal on in front of it. They got absolutely no information whatsoever, on purpose, not to test them. It was more me ticking boxes. So I've tasted it. I know exactly what goes into it. So you can end up being a little bit biased when there's clove. So you're going to search for clove. There's ginger. So you're going to personally search for it. But when you don't have a clue about it, it literally is a blind tasting. So the likes of Philip Crawford from Causeway Coastal, Omar Fitzel from That's Dram Good, Daniel Pennington, many other lads, each one of them were tasting it and one's going, I'm getting candied orange. And in my head, I know why that's there, but there's no candied orange in it. But they're getting the flavor profile across, so that's fantastic. Tick. Next thing, they're getting the ginger heat of it. Tick. Next thing, they're getting a honeyed sweetness, grand. And everything I had down on the list, by the time they had finished the Twitter taste, and every single box had been ticked. And I was like, that means that not only is it high in cloves, but these people can pick out everything that's subtle in the background, which means me and Jared have done our jobs justice. And the flavor profile has come across. So as I said before, unless I can get a DeLorean back to 88 and go the whole way to stand beside them stirring the pots originally, this is as close as I can physically get this moment in time.
I think I remember questioning you at the time, was there star anise in it? And you said no, there was no licorice component in it at all. And
no,
I felt very stupid.
No, not at all. It was one of the first notes Jared actually picked up was he couldn't say it was fennel, he couldn't say it was star anise, and he couldn't say it was licorice root. There was a combination of that licorice flavor. He couldn't put his finger on. And it was only when we kind of played around with different tincture combinations. From what I can remember, Spikenard, which is a valerian root, it's mace blades, which is the outer skin of a nutmeg, cinnamon, and saffron. Once you combine the four of them together, you get a cross between, kind of like a pot still from the 1950s, a cross between a menthol warmth and a licorice sweetness and heat. That's the thing that it keeps coming up in tasting notes, especially those doing blind tastings. There's a licorice element there, but nearly everyone who tastes it puts it down as yourself with star anise. Myself was more kind of raw fennel. With Jared, it was more fennel seed. Each person who has a taste of it, you get that different characteristic of that licorice flavor. It's the same with the honey. There's no honey in it. It's the same with the candied orange. There's no candied orange in it. It's just different compounds from different botanicals coming together. Best described, stick a distillate into wood. You're either going to pull out vanilla, you're going to pull out peppered spice, you're going to pull out something, and that's the wood. The wood itself isn't vanilla, and it isn't licorice, and it isn't spice, but it's given it across. It's those compounds inside that are hidden. It's only when they're combined together give a huge amount of complexity, which is just fantastic.
No, I mean, it's massively complex, and the history element and the research that went into it, phenomenal. But where do you see this being drank? Is it a cocktail, or is it neat, or raw, or with a mixer, or how do you see it being consumed? What was your aim?
Where I see it being consumed? Everywhere. Well, the funny thing about this, and I always find it funny to answer this in this way, but myself and Jared have a massive cocktail background between the two of us, and yet coming up to the launch of this, we only wanted it neat, because we're telling a history story. We want people not to compare this specifically to whiskey or to butching, but to taste the three of them side by side. So what I would love is if people are doing tasting flights, where you're doing a history flight, you can have Aqua Vitae beside a Puccin, beside a modern interpretation of whiskey, be it peated whiskey, blended whiskey, pot still whiskey, single malt, whatever, where you can actually show someone the history. And that was one of the motivations behind creating this. It's a missing link, it's a missing gap, and it's a missing puzzle piece to the story where you're explaining, which is very
I think
complex.
that's the beauty of it, Chris. I think it doesn't need to be compared to whiskey or Puccin or anything. It stands on its own and its own category in a way as well. But I mean, the history side of it is fascinating, and the complexity and the flavors is. I mean, I find it very intense in flavor, and I was maybe mistakenly drinking it neat, but very interesting. And you know, the more you think about it, the more you dig out in terms of flavor. You know, what components are in there.
That's originally what we wanted, was, like you were saying, like the people to sit over it, but not just sit over it, have a sip and form an opinion, sit over it for a good length of time, because the natural oils dry out your mouth, then there's a natural amount of sweetness coming through. It coats your mouth in about 7 different ways over 3 or 4 minutes. Each one of them is complex in itself, but when we were doing the launch for the liquid, we did the launch in 1661 in Dublin, and as part of the agreement for the launch, Jared and Dave decided to do cocktails, so a full cocktail menu with Aqua Vitae. It was 6
I was there that night. Yeah, I was there.
Yeah, you were. That was fantastic, but it was greatly received, which was beautiful. But the part of the agreement was everyone who came into the room got Aqua Vitae on its own first. Yeah. Tell the story, let them form their own opinion. It is quite intense in flavor. There's a lot going on because it is multiple layers. But then afterwards, you have, it was 5 drinks over 4 different styles of punches, hot drinks, long drinks, just to show the versatility of it. Because not really in Ireland per se, but in Scandinavia you have Aquavit, and Aquavit is kind of like Aqua Vitae or gin, but it's fennel, caraway, or dill forward, as opposed to gin being juniper forward, and Aqua Vitae being a maceration and spice forward.
Yeah.
So showing off how well that works in drinks, we had a room full of bartenders and a room full of industry, and each one of them were blown away, not just by the recipes that were there, which is great, but by the flavor combinations that are going on. So if you're mixing this with fortified wines like ports or sherries, things that are light in fruit or heavy in fruit or heavy in stone fruits, there are ingredients in this like your raisins, your honey, your spikenard, and your mace blades that are really going to complement it. But if you do a flip reverse where you're going for dry liqueurs, herbal liqueurs, more kind of earthy notes, you get the raw spice element in this that will really come forward and help out. Mm-hmm. If you're using sweeteners like sugar, different flavors, honey, different flavors, agave, more earthy flavors. So this is certainly something that's quite complex. It'll be hard for some bartenders to nail down exactly what they want to do with it. But the list of ingredients this works with is actually through the roof. It really blew myself and Jared away, because every time we mixed it with something, it worked. But we were pulling out something else in it. It's not a vodka that's one note, or a rum that has 2 or 3 notes, that aspects that you're pulling. Each time you add or subtract an ingredient, you're almost playing with a different side of the profile, which really makes it interesting.
I mean, for me, Chris, I mean, it's the amount of research and the history that goes into it as well that makes it a really interesting product. And I know, you, like you said, it took 3.5 years of research. What else have you got in the pipeline? I know you're doing many things. You're involved in being a consultant for many of the independent bottlers, some of the distilleries. Obviously, you're involved with Off the Cuff. What other things are you involved in at the moment, and beyond these, or can you talk about them?
Sometimes I talk too much. Well, with Jared, and off the cuff, it will be helping him with different flavor profiles and different releases over the next couple of years. For the independent brands, there's a lot of guys out there at the moment that are on their own or very, very small teams, and just giving a hand, giving them a bit of advice. You can call it consultancy if you want. But yeah, giving them advice, just showing them what other brands are doing so that they can find their niche in the market, or they can find their flavor profiles that they want to try. Like from a bartender point of view, I work somewhere with over 200 whiskies, so we know what's on the backdrop. We know how many different people have done so many different types of blends. We've done the research into your area's history, what used to come from there, what distilleries used to be there. If you're trying to represent a specific county, we'll advise you what's come before you, so that if you're saying you're making that, say a Dublin whiskey, for instance, if you're making a Dublin whiskey and Dublin's history is hugely pot still orientated, to the point where Tullamore Dew had Dublin whiskey wrote on their label, not because they were from Dublin, obviously, but because it was a Dublin style of whiskey. Things like that, just help brands out, be authentic, be transparent as much as humanly possible, and yeah, help them with different flavors and blends and casting notions and ideas. And
yeah, what are the things happening now in the Irish whiskey sector that you're finding the most exciting, and what are the trends that are possibly worrying you about what you might see out there in the industry?
The most exciting thing at the moment, especially in the last 2 years, is also probably the most detrimental. So one of the most exciting things in the last 2 years, especially with COVID and everyone's on social media because everyone was stuck at home and nobody was really working much, is you have tons of friends of pages, you have tons of dedicated enthusiast pages, groups, and then you also have collectors, flippers and all that kind of thing, without going down a rabbit hole. But what you have at the moment is independent bottlers doing 2, 3, 4, and 5, and 600 bottle releases. Because there's such a fan club or such a dedication to that brand, they're selling out overnight, which is fantastic. But when the industry reopens and the bars reopen fully, and all the whiskey bars in Ireland, let alone the normal bars who can stock things, but once the whiskey bars open in Ireland, you're going to have independent bottlers out there that really, really need a good hand, and small little brands, new distilleries that really need a hand. But it's almost impossible for bars to stock their portfolio and stock everything that they have going forward if the releases are being snapped up like that.
Yeah.
So you have a single cask release, which is brilliant. You sell out overnight, which is fantastic. It means they're getting the money back in their pockets. They can reinvest it into their next project. But you will end up with independent brands screaming and shouting to be in different bars around the country. And those bars and those bartenders, managers, etc., really want to help them. Like look at Dingle, for instance. Dingle now have a core malt, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
You can sell that this week, sell out next week, buy it in next month, buy it in 6 months after that, and stay buying it in if it's a core malt. But up until now, each batch was selling out so quickly, each batch of pasta was selling out so quickly that there's whiskey bars out there that would have a bottle sitting on a shelf, maybe 1 or 2 upstairs, maybe even a case. But you can't really put that on a whiskey menu because how long is it going to last? And
it's not sustainable, is it?
Yeah, that's the thing about it. So obviously it takes money to make money, and it takes money to reinvest and get bigger numbers and bigger volumes. But one of the best things at the moment is these fan pages, and it is the enthusiasm of buying out all these releases and everybody cracking open bottles. One of the hashtags I've been using for years is seal breakers, because everything we get, we open, everything we get, we taste, we share it out, be it sending samples or have people over to have a taste, just to encourage, one, what do these things actually taste like? Because there's so many flippers and collectors out there at the moment. You miss out the opportunity of buying a bottle for 50 quid you go to buy it tomorrow, it's sold out and someone's selling it for 200. You may not get a chance or an opportunity to taste it. So if we get a bottle of something, we crack straight away. And
you've been very generous with some of the whiskies you've made available for sharing, Chris, and some of them are very limited releases, and some of them are very old. I mean, I know you did an old Powers tasting and an old Redbreast tasting several times, and that stuff is a lot of work to get your hands on. I mean, some of those you've done through the guild, and some of them you've done independently. But it's great to get an opportunity to try those things. The sad part is,
sad part is sometimes they don't ever exist, and sometimes it takes years to get them.
Yes,
it is a hard thing, because if you spend €1,000 on liquid, and before you break the seal, you look at the auction sites and you see that it's now €2,000 worth of liquid, and you can make a profit off it. It's very hard for some people to turn down that opportunity. But from a history side, and from just curiouser and curiouser side, when last year, was it August or September when I was with you? We did the Redbreast tasting.
Yeah, we did the decades of Redbreast tasting. That was
we did,
fantastic event.
60s, 70s, 80s. The Maison de Whiskey from 2005 and the Dream Cask, and one of the cask strengths. Along those lines, like I have absolutely no problem whatsoever. All the tastings I generally run will either have money going towards charity or be done for cost, because everyone in the room is there to try something that they'll never get a chance to try. So that's always been the objective. And when you run the thing, you also get to be part of it. So with yourself, sitting down with yourself, walking through them, talking through them, getting to taste them, and then having Garland involved, or Jer Garland, talk on behalf of the Redbreast history. And then between the three of us, we were able to share different sides of the stories. But if you were to sit down with an individual bottle or all those bottles together, you wouldn't know all those stories. Everyone wouldn't know the reasons why the casks are chose or anything like that. So you'd always walk away very happy, but you walk away with a lot of questions, more questions than answers. So that's one of the reasons why we always do the tastings.
But you do like the historical ones, I noticed. I mean, I remember we were down in Kilkenny, we did the one with Seamus Lowry, the old Bushmills. You've done old Powers ones. I think have you done an old Jameson one as well, I think, at one point?
I've done old Jameson as part of the tasting. I haven't focused on it yet. There's 2 bottles I get before I do that. The 15-year-old Millennium one. Fortunately, seal on that one about 2 or 3 years ago, so I want to get a fresh one for a tasting. And I need to get something from the 80s. That's not the brown label, because I'll scare people away with the brown label.
The brown label one is scarily bad. Oh, I remember.
Well, I have a 15-year-old inside with the brown label. But again, it's part of the history.
And whether they're good or bad, they're just interesting sometimes, like I say, a bad whiskey, if there is such a thing, which of course there is, can be very interesting. You can find out as much about it.
No, go ahead.
No, I mean, you can find out as much about tasting a whiskey that you don't like as much as tasting something that you love, and understanding why a whiskey tastes the way it does can be just as interesting. So from that point of view, I've found some whiskeys that I don't like fascinating.
No, 100%. And that's it. Like, especially when it comes to that brown labeled 12 and 15-year-old.
Yeah.
That was at a time where the export market going across to the States, especially, they were going for hot whiskies, they were going for Irish coffees, they were pushing for Irish whiskey bean and cocktails. And the flavor profile for us, again, because we're so full of sugars and salts and all these different types of preservatives, they wouldn't have as much sugar in everything. So when we find the sour notes in this, almost like a sulfur kind of note to it, it could be because we're unbelievably sensitive to that style. It's something that we'd never go near. Not to say that it's an absolutely fantastic thing, but it could come down as well being worse for us because of what we're used to. And in
Oh,
fairness,
absolutely.
that's unbelievably.
People's profiles change over time. There's no doubt, you know, that we're now a more processed food and flavor orientated society, which is.
So that's it. And then was it one of the first tastings we did this year was I did it with Brian Hennessy from the Whiskey Chaser and Adrian Zansk from Bottle of View. Was a peat tasting. So in January of this year, peat is very topical, and yet it was annoying me for about a year at this stage, but peat wasn't being celebrated the way in which it should, because peat is a flavor profile that a lot of people associate with too much smoke, too much bitterness, too much dry. If you've ever had an Islay whiskey, which is quite intense, that's the kind of thing. When I say peat, people go, I'm going to run away. But there are companies out there at the moment that are doing fantastic things with it, be it the likes of Two Stacks using only 2% in their blends, to Dark Silky using 15%, Normal Silky using 2%, different things like that, to Bill Phil from WD O'Connell, Hinches, all these different places using 100% peated malt, Black Pits from Teelings using Salthorn casks. So in January we did 8 different brands, 8 different ways in which they were using peated whiskies to showcase it. There was, if I can remember correctly, 86 of us sitting the tasting virtually, which is a fun challenge in itself. All credit to all the societies at the moment that are doing Zoom tastings, doing them for, especially Paul with his Belfast Whiskey Week. That's going to be huge. But when you're getting that volume of glass bottles or plastic bottles, wrapping them, packaging them, sending them, doing it with enough advance notice that it's landing in time for the tastings themselves, can be detrimental to your mental health.
No. I mean, I've spoken
to. Actually happens.
I've spoken to a few heartbroken people that have been filling miniatures and filling test tubes or filling small bottles, and it's no small task. I really take their hat off to them. So. What else is in the pipeline then, Chris? What are you most looking forward to when lockdown is over? Are you actually looking forward to going back full time to work and being out and having people coming in?
I've been basically full time since August, give or take a couple of weeks of takeaway. It's certainly very different. Actually having people sitting at the bar counter and having a chat, it's a massive thing missing from the industry at the moment. It's what makes Irish hospitality Irish hospitality. Yeah. Spending a couple seconds at somebody's table to move on to the next order, it can be a little bit of impersonal compared to what Ireland is known for. So that aspect of it, definitely. That and actually having a day off and sitting down at somebody else's counter and trying people's new drinks and trying new whiskies, rums and stuff like that from different bars around the island. There is so many different places in Ireland I haven't got a chance to visit yet, or visit in over 2 years, obviously, for a lot of it. Getting down to Killarney and having a drink in Celtic Whiskey Bar, getting up to Dublin, going to 1661, and a massive number of the cocktail bars that are currently closed down. Getting up the north, especially.
Have they closed for good, Chris?
I'd hope not. There's a good few bartenders out there at the moment that have to swap within their bar groups or swap within their regions just to make sure they're covered for a couple of months until something reopens, if they reopen. And it's always fingers crossed. Like since March of 2020, when we're told 2 weeks, we just take a gulp and we wait and see what happens, because 2 weeks turned into 6.5 months. Or 5.5 to 6 months. 2 weeks of Christmas turned into, if we didn't do takeaway personally, another couple of months. And then a decision now is going to be made in 2 weeks' time for the 19th.
Yeah. There's Matt Kelly now talking about this red press testing that we did. I actually have to say, it is one of the big memories that I have of the lockdown was that red press tasting. To get the opportunity to sit and try that series through the decades was really something very special. I won't forget that myself. That was really well organized. Hats off to you for that.
And a huge thank you to Anthony Sheehy in the Irish Whiskey Auctions, because it was himself who helped get the liquid across to the States so Matt Kelly could actually join. He's bridging a huge gap for Belfast Whiskey Week for myself and for a few other different peoples and tastings and stuff. So it is a small community, but nearly everybody in the community reaches out and helps in some way, shape, or form. So tastings like that, you have to give back.
Yeah. Look, I just have to commend you and thank you for the contribution. And this, I really think it's a selfless contribution you've made, Chris, in terms of sharing your knowledge, always been generous to share samples and, anything that you know about new releases and so forth with me and with everybody. And, the knowledge that you do have, I really highly respect what you know. I mean, there aren't many voices out there that I would hold in really high esteem, and you're certainly one of them. I look forward to seeing you again in physical form, as opposed to this virtual world that we're becoming accustomed to some extent. But anything you'd like to really see happen in the sector over the next while, and what are you really looking forward to? Or
honestly, especially over the last 2 years, what I'm looking forward to is going into a physical bar, sitting at the counter and seeing Pride and Place, Redbreast, and Jameson and Powers sitting side by side with 2 stacks, Cologne, Schlieve League, WD O'Connell, Teelings,
and Aqua Vitae.
Yeah, Aqua Vitae, of course, yes, and Puccin, seeing all the different categories and all the different places represented. Our island is very versatile, and actually being able to go into bars and see that versatility, because these small guys have been putting a ton of work behind the scenes, as much as the big guys, just smaller teams, and seeing them get enough releases out there and enough big of numbers to be represented, be absolutely fantastic. And that definitely do justice to the last 2 years.
Tell me, outside of whiskey and outside of drinks, what are your hobbies, or what are your interests? I have a feeling that you don't have much time for anything else.
Work, and that takes up a lot. What is it? Just getting out for walks, getting breaths of fresh air, spending time with my wife, usual stuff, seeing family. That takes up majority of my time. And then traveling in between, I'm on my phone. That's where social media comes in. And
yes.
Then, work is work. Work is, I'm passionate about what I do, but
and that passion 100% comes through, Chris. Like I said, you're the epitome of everything that is good about the Irish whiskey enthusiasts, I think, and really wish you every success. I really look forward to catching up with you again in person, and thank you for, you've always answered questions that we might have had about spirits or whiskey, and we look forward to being able to come down and hopefully attend a Whiskey Guild event again, and drop into the Dillon and some of the other bars down there, and catch up. Yeah, look, it's always great to be down there. So look, thank you very much. Thank you for taking the time. I know you're in hot demand, and we'll catch up soon.
Thank you very much for having me.
Oh, thank you. Take care. Sláinte. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. Chris is an absolute gentleman. Like I said, the epitome of what a great enthusiast and proponent of Irish whiskey should be. So wish him all the very best of luck. Thank you for joining us. I hope you enjoyed that. And we look forward to seeing you next week. We're back next week. We'll announce who the guest is later on in the week. And please do subscribe, like, follow, and it helps keep the interest in the podcast going. So thank you very much. Have a good evening and look after yourselves. Bye.